Hey guys, welcome back to Emmalition. I'm Emma, this is Emmalition. Today we're going to be watching a few more Elden Ring lore videos. You guys enjoyed the last one and I personally want to deepen my knowledge of the world of Elden Ring that we all love so very much and learn some things. So that's what we're going to do today. I have pulled up Vaati's Elden Ring's Demigods explained video because I'm hoping we'll find out a bit more about Malenia in that and obviously the rest of the demigods too. So I think that'll be interesting, especially if the DLC explores one or more of them. So I shall say no more. Let's listen to the dulcet tones of Vaati tell us about the Elden Ring demigods.
The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika. There was Godwyn, Morgott, Mohg, Radahn, Rykard, Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia.
That's a lot of kids.
Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Malenia, Blade of Miquella. And Malenia. Not again. All of these demigods had fallen from grace by the time the shattering occurred. But in this video, I want to mostly talk about the origins of these characters. Who these demigods were before the fall.
Yeah, I'm
Some of
excited
these
by
demigods
this.
fell a long way indeed. Before he became this unsightly mess, Godwyn the Golden was quite the heroic figure.
No
He
offense.
was born of the promising union between Lord Godfrey and Queen Marika, and he achieved great renown for his bravery in one of their wars at least, the War of the Ancient Dragons. This war began when Grandsax, a great ancient dragon, rained calamity down upon Leyndell, marking the only time in historical record that Leyndell's walls had fallen.
That is interesting.
It's not clear why Grandsax first attacked, but fortifying themselves against lightning, the Knights of the Erdtree weathered his assault and Grandsax was defeated. However, this was only the beginning, and a bitter war against the ancient dragons was to follow. During this war, the Erdtree Sentinels had an
I'm assuming this is to do with Placidusax, and the rewinding of time was to show us that part of the Ancient Dragon War. I feel like that's a fair assumption. Do you know what? I'm just going to turn it down a bit as well because it's so heckin' loud. Right, let's go.
epiphany that the only way to truly protect the Erdtree was to become dragons themselves. And so, despoiling the corpses of their foes, the grotesque sentinels served the Erdtree,
That's really cool.
but fought with the claws of the enemy instead.
Cool.
In the end, the ancient dragons were routed once again. In a graveyard of swords by the Stormcaller Church, the end of the war is commemorated.
That's awesome.
Here we...
Do you know what? Sorry, I'm not going to keep pausing it. But that graveyard of swords is such a... and it's just the... What am I trying to say? It's the epitome of environmental storytelling, which I think Souls games do better than any other game, because you wouldn't know that, right? When you walk past it, you wouldn't know that that's what that graveyard of swords is. But like a lot of people would say, well, like, why is that clever then? Or like, if you don't know, then what's the point? But to me, if I was a lonely tarnished wandering the lands between and I walked past a graveyard of swords, I wouldn't know what it's for either. So it's kind of like the most immersive way to tell the story, because you're only going to find that out through notes and pieces of information in items and things like that. And that's how you would find out about those kind of things in the real world, right? So I think that's just, it just epitomizes how perfect these games are at telling, at drip feeding a narrative. And if you choose to uncover it for yourself, you'll find out the secrets of the land. And if you don't, you're just like the average tarnished that walks the lands. And you don't know anything. So, yeah, really makes you think.
Learn that during battle, Godwyn the Golden defeated Fortisax, called the mightiest dragon of them all.
Wow.
However, he did not kill Fortisax. Instead, he befriended him. And it was in this act that the powers of the ancient dragons truly became a part of Leyndell. After all, only those loved by dragons can survive the ordeal of cladding their bodies in lightning So, from an unlikely friendship, an ancient dragon cult was born in the capital city, and the Knights of Leyndell learned to worship the dragons and wield their lightning.
This is so awesome.
Lanciax, sister of Fortisax, even took human form to better commune with the knights. It was officially decided that the worship of the ancient dragons did not conflict with belief in the Erdtree, and it was all thanks to Godwyn.
Do you know what? Godwyn befriending Fortisax, was it? And bringing a rather unlikely union between dragons and the people of Leyndell is not unlike Rennala and Radahnn's unlikely marriage. Some parallels there.
Commander of the dragons, Golden Lightning, and a true child of the Golden lineage. But now, let's talk about Morgott and Mohg, the Omen twins, who were also born of Godfrey and Marika's golden lineage. First,
Mohg and his
what is an
questionable
omen?
taste in men.
Well, to put it simply, an omen is an accursed child, seen as impure, as they are born with horns on the body and face. When this happens, the correct thing to do, culturally at least, is to cut off the horns of the omen, an act which usually causes them to perish. It's pretty messed up.
Oh.
But some omen do survive this process, and
It's
some
sad.
omen are even given a cleaver, crafted specifically for them and awarded as a tool of war, although these weapons are bestowed with a readiness to take them away. We find one such omen in an Erdtree camp upon the Altus Plateau. Before you fight it, you might have noticed another omen nearby writhing in its sleep.
Yeah.
It's said that omens see evil spirits in their nightmares, and I think this omen is dreaming, haunted by...
Isn't that such a grotesque and upsetting image of this omen writhing around with all of these really sore looking like cuts on its body where the horns have been removed? This part of it, I've got goosebumps because it just makes me feel so, I don't know, it's just depressing, isn't it? It's really, really sad. It's really sad. I'll let Vaati carry on, but I have a lot of opinions on this. It's so wrong.
The vengeful spirits of its accursed kin. This brings us to the Omen Killers, who are horrifying butchers of twisted conscience. They wear these horned masks that make a mockery of the Omen's nightmares, and these butchers hunt the Omen and amputate their horns. The first Omen killer was named Rollo, a famous perfumer who had to imbibe a physic to rid himself of
Viking history
emotion
there.
so that he could better perform his tasks. Remember, it seems many Omen have their horns excised when they're very young. That's definitely disturbing enough to warrant an emotion-killing physic in my book.
That's so messed
However,
up.
if the Omen is born of royalty, then their horns are not cut off, but the Omen is kept underground, unbeknownst to anyone, and imprisoned for eternity.
This
By
is
way of
awful.
example, you would have seen all kinds of Omen confined to the sewers beneath Leyndell. But why are Omen considered to be accursed in the first place? Some of them are clearly intelligent, so what's inherently wrong with being born with horns and great strength?
I am going to assume, based on the last lore video that we watched, it's because they're associated with the Great Tree, which I guess is like what the Erdtree set to take over from, right? Like they represent the history of the lands between that the Golden Order sought to quash, I would assume. This is so effed up. Like, I'm genuinely quite devastated. Like, I've got tears in my eyes thinking about how they were just butchered as babies and left to die just because of how they look. It really is just, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Illustrative of the world, isn't it? Because this kind of stuff happens still. It's really, really horrible. I feel sad.
Well, it's important to remember, I think, that this curse might only really exist in the context of the Golden Order. After all, those afflicted with Omen horns are not able to return to the Erdtree for rebirth and are said to be born outside of its grace. But why does the Golden Order disavow the Omen, then?
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but my working theory is that it's to do with the Crucible.
That's what
According to this ancient
thought,
incantation,
I think.
horns were once an aspect of the Erd Tree's primordial crucible where all life was once blended together.
Yeah.
And with the exception of a couple of crucible nights in and around Leyndell, we know that the Golden Order has started to distance itself from most things that touch upon the crucible. While things
Sad.
like horns, knots, feathers, and scales once grew on the human body and were considered signifiers of the divine, now they are disdained as impurities as civilization has advanced. We learn this from the knot, scale, and feather talismans, all of which are guarded by Omen, or dropped by Omen killers, no less. Unfortunately for the Order of the Erd Tree, these once divine impurities seem to crop up in some births, whether they like it or not. Almost like it's a genetic trait, as if it touches upon the crucible at the root of the Erd Tree. And so you have to ask, is it really a curse to be born as a graceless omen? Well, as with most curses in these games,
I don't think so.
that depends on your perspective.
No.
In any case,
No.
Mohg and Morgott were Omen royalty, and thus they were born into a wretched mire far below the earth, horns and all.
That is
Here,
so bogus.
they were kept under the strictest confinement. Each of them were bound with charmed shackles that were covered in roots or thorns and bathed in golden magic. It seems very few people were supposed to know that they even existed. Morgott, for his part, renounced and despised his accursed Omen blood, but his brother Mohg embraced it. Deep
Yeah.
underground, Mohg stood before an outer god, a being called the Formless Mother, who craves
Oh.
wounds, a being capable of bestowing power upon accursed blood. In this
Wow.
moment, Mohg's accursed blood erupted with fire, and he became besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Here, deep below the earth, he would go on to build a dynasty of blood in reverence of a mother, something it seems he never truly had.
Do you know what? I am like all for supporting villains who are kind of justified. Like, I can't think of any examples right now, annoyingly, but you know, in movies when it's very much like good guy versus the bad guy, and then at the end you find out the bad guy just had really bad mommy issues, and then you end up feeling bad for him, and then the good guy doesn't kill the bad guy. He's just like, you know, I'll teach you a lesson, and then bad guy ends up in jail, but he survives. But you end up thinking, did he kind of have a point? Maybe. I wish I could think of an example. I really wish I could think of an example. Maybe like The Incredibles. You know, the ginger kid? What I'm saying is Mohg appears to be this big, scary, blood-toting, evil, ugly villain, and he's not quite beautiful like someone like Malenia, but like, who can blame him? He is kind of justified, and I'm really happy that he built his beautiful blood palace. It's lovely. I really support him and his endeavours. Okay.
As for Morgott, he was born into the same accursed fate as his twin brother, but despite not being blessed with grace, he loved the Erd Tree all the same, and even took it upon himself to crawl out of the sewers and become the Erd Tree's protector when the Erd Tree needed him most. In the end, he rightfully became the Omen King.
Stockholm
and Lord of
Syndrome.
Leyndell.
He's got
Omen or
Stockholm
not,
Syndrome.
He was, after all, born of Godfrey and Marika's golden lineage.
Poor guy.
Of course, the marriage between Godfrey and Marika would be ended, and before long, Marika remarried with another man, a champion named Radahn, who Marika calls her
Fuming.
other half. He became second Elden Lord and the king consort, but he also brought with him 3 children from a previous marriage that he had had with a Carian queen named Radahn.
Still
These
angry about
children
this.
were Rani, Rykard, and Radahn, and they all became demigod stepchildren after Radagon's reunion with Queen Marika.
Interesting.
Possessed of his father's flaming red hair, Radahn was fond of its heroic implications and considered himself to be born of a great champion. Yet he also looked up to another man, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, Queen Marika's first husband and the Lord of the Battlefield. But Radahn wasn't just the son of Radahn and an aspiring Lord of the Battlefield, he was also the son of Rennala, who was head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria and Queen of Caria. So as a Carian royal, inclined towards sorcery, Radahn bent his will towards mastering gravitational magics. Rock sling, gravity well, collapsing stars. These techniques were
cool.
taught to him in Celia, the town of sorcery, all so he would never have to abandon his beloved but scrawny steed. That said, before long, his powers would be put towards a more cosmic purpose than simply allowing him to ride his own horse.
That's so cute.
Radahn was taught gravitational magic by an alabaster lord, a member of a race of ancients with skin of stone who was said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. And when his lessons were complete, Radahn uttered these chilling words.
Thank you for your tutelage. For now, I can challenge the stars.
And, of course, he did conquer the stars.
That's
and
crazy.
The very constellations would be halted by his strength. But of course, you kind of have to ask, why? Why was it necessary to conquer the stars in the first place? Well, I have a couple of theories. Theory one is that it was done in self-defense.
Yeah, I wonder if Radahn knew more than others about the greater will and the outer gods, and maybe this was his way of, protecting himself from that, because, I mean, they're in space, right? That's kind of the point.
After all, according to the sword gravestone, Radahn was protecting Celia. What's more, gravitational magic has destructive power, and many gravitational beasts are proof of that destructive power. A being named Astel had even come down to the lands between in the past and destroyed a place called the Eternal City.
Wow.
What's more, Celians are descendants of the Eternal, positioned right above the Eternal City underground, so there is an argument to be made for Radahn purely defending Celia for some reason here. But it's possible for Radahn to have fought in this conflict and to have made the first move as well. So this is theory 2, that Radahn conquered the stars as a preventative measure in service to the greater will.
Oh.
According to a set of astrologer items, the night sky cradles fate. There's even a banished sect of people called the Nox, who live deep below the earth in eternal anticipation of the coming age of stars and their Lord of Night. Long ago, these people invoked the ire of the greater will, so it would make sense that those in service to the greater will might have sought to arrest the stars and put an end to this fate. What's more, Radahn was just a huge fanboy of Godfrey, and he seems to have more loyalty to the Erd Tree than to the moon. Finally, the telescope item description says that the fate once writ in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order.
Wow.
So surely this is referencing Radahn's actions, and it levels the blame at the Golden Order. But putting Radahn's motivations aside, it's a fact that the stars were held back, and that this had great consequences for many, especially for the rest of his Carian royal family.
Let me explain. The fate of the Carian royal family is guided by the stars, as is the fate of Lady Rani, first heir in the Carian royal line. But General Radahn is the conqueror of the stars, who stood up to the swirling constellations, halting their movement in a smashing victory. And so, if General Radahn were defeated, the stars would once again resume their movement, as would Lady Rani's destiny.
Wow.
Lunar Princess Rani was the daughter of Radahn and Rennala, and sister to Radahn. Interestingly, if you look at her true body atop the Divine Tower, it looks like she might have also inherited the red hair of Radahn.
I have never noticed that before. Like, ever. And I did think, like, why is she so blue? Like, I guess Rennala's blue, but it just feels like they put a real emphasis in Elden Ring on, like, the flaming red hair being, like, a whole thing to do with lineage and power. Have I noticed that? I don't think I've noticed that. That's so awesome. I just had a thought as well while we were sitting and watching that we can come back to, but I wonder why Godfrey and Marika had was it Godfrey or Godwyn? The dad. I wonder why their kids came out as omens. Like, that makes me question the lineage of one of them. Maybe Marika has something to hide. Food for thought.
Cool detail. But unlike her brother, Radahn, she quite clearly took after her mother more, who was Rennala, head of the Carian royal family. The House of Caria has this storied history, one that seems to go way back to the astrologers. In the
Cool.
Carian Manor, we find one of their
Are we going to find
treasures,
out why there's
the
spider
Sword
hands?
of Night and Flame. It reads, astrologers who preceded the sorcerers established themselves in mountaintops that nearly touched the sky and considered the fire giants their neighbors. Rennala herself was an astrologer, always chasing the stars in her youth. Then she met the full moon, and in time, the astrologer became a queen, establishing the House of Caria.
How
as
does that
royalty.
work?
Caria appears to have a matriarchal hierarchy with multiple princesses and Carian knights that
Hell
serve
yeah.
as their retainers. Now, however, there is only one princess, Rani, daughter of Rennala. And at the time of her birth, she would have been set to inherit quite a lot of power indeed, for the Carian royal family was at its height, and her mother was not only queen, she was also head of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, having bewitched them with the enchanting power of the full moon.
So
Leading
damn
the young
cool.
Rani by the hand, Rennala guided her daughter to a meeting with a moon of her own. What Rani beheld was cold, dark, and veiled in occult mystery.
It's a lot of moons,
A dark
huh?
moon, a sort of twin to Rennala's own full moon. You can even see both of these hanging in the sky if you stargaze from the heights of the
Never
moonlight
even noticed
plateau.
that. Oh my god.
Another who guided Rani was a character called the Snowy Crone, who the young Rani encountered
Did
deep
we
in the
meet
woods.
this person?
When you look at Rani, it's actually the likeness of this snow witch that you're seeing, as the doll that now houses Rani's soul was modelled after her, probably
Wow.
as a sign of respect. Clearly, Rani looked up to this mysterious woman.
So Rani met the Snowy Crone, had tutelage from her, loved her whole vibe with the hat and the blue skin, and fashioned a doll to look like her because she was a fangirl. And then I guess when she left her mortal shell, she decided, you know what? I don't like being ginger. That's definitely what happened.
She became Rani's secret mentor, and she even knew about the Dark Moon, teaching the young Rani to fear it as she imparted her cold sorceries. So, what do these moons represent? That's just a theory, but I think the moons kind of act as guides. The lost black moon of Noxtella, for example, was the guide of countless stars.
That's
What's
cool.
more, Rani
Like a
and
homing
Rennala were
beacon.
heavily influenced by their moons. Rennala's moon bewitched the academy that she became the head of.
That's such
and
a gorgeous
Rani's dark
ballerina.
moon, for its part, also imparts wisdom and leads a voyage in the Age of Stars.
Oh, sorry. Imagine if the DLC is the voyage to the Age of Stars, although I guess you will have had to get that ending, right? In order to access the DLC, so maybe not. Unless Miyazaki just says, look, you have to complete Rani's quest if you want to do the DLC, and then everyone who didn't do it is going to have to play the game again. Can you imagine? That would be a very Miyazaki thing to do, wouldn't it? Just pure torture.
Ending. They could even be outer gods. And yet, for all of this guidance, Caria and Leonia as a whole have experienced steep decline. Radahn betrayed the House of the Moon. Radahn
Scumbag.
locked the stars out of motion. The Academy town is flooded to the north. Caria has been ruined in the west, and the stars and moon have gone their separate ways.
Interestingly, Radahn, for reasons we aren't aware of, stopped stars, right? Which gives Caria its power. So, and then Radahn turned his back and betrayed Rennala and the Carian royal family. It makes me wonder if there is some connection between Radahn and Radahn, obviously him being his dad, like Radahn just being like, well, I hate mom too, so here's what I can do to ruin her life. And then they played baseball together. I don't know.
Nevertheless, Rani, last princess of Caria, remains, carefully setting new plans into motion. Sibling
Cool.
to Rani and Radahn was a man
I'm dying
named
to learn
Rykard,
more about
who was
Rykard.
Lord of the Volcano Manor.
Together!
There is evidence that Rykard was friendly with his siblings. He conspired with his sister Rani later on.
Oh,
And
besties.
there's even a portrait of Radahn hung in the Volcano Manor,
Badass.
as well as a portrait of Rykard himself before the fall.
That's awesome.
Item descriptions mark Rykard as stern, ambitious, heroic, and blasphemous. A part of this blasphemy was opposing the Erd Tree, which actually drew many knights to his banner.
Real
for
cool.
Rykard believed in taking by force, just as the gods did, and clearly many believed that he would usher in a new age. The armor set of the Gelmir Knights reveals to us what were once very loyal soldiers. The crest of red feathers are there to symbolize Rykard's pedigree as Lord Radahnn's son,
Nice.
and the emblem upon their chest piece represents a lord who had lofty ambitions. However, as Rykard delved into the ancient secrets of Mount Gelmir, he came across the immortal Great Serpent, an ancient deity that aligned with Rykard's ambitions. And so,
Ugh.
Rykard fed himself to the Great Serpent.
You just wouldn't, would you?
So that he might devour,
This is
grow,
never going to be the
and
best
live
option.
eternally. Alas, this was too much for his knights, and they believed that their master's heroic ambitions had degenerated into mere greed.
Yeah,
so
too far.
They searched desperately for a weapon with which they might halt their lord, and they found it too. The immortal serpent had lived for a long time, and so there was also a weapon to kill it that had been designed long ago as well, a serpent hunter. But it was too late. As the lord lost his dignity, so too did the knights lose
dear.
their master. Not that it bothered Rykard.
Now we can devour God together.
Together.
Next, we need to discuss Malenia and Miquella.
Yes.
These two were twins
So
as
excited.
they were born. No, Rykard, please. Anyway, as you know, Radahnn's marriage with Rennala did not last. Afterwards, he returned to the Golden Order
Together.
and became Queen Marika's consort. But what I haven't yet mentioned is that, together, they were blessed with two demigod children, the so-called twin prodigies. Now, in the last lore video, I briefly proposed that these two twins were born after the Shattering, after Radahn and Marika had merged together to become a single god. However, I've since changed my mind. I think Malenia
okay.
and Miquella were clearly born before the Shattering. There's just so much proof that these two twins were a force that were influencing the world long before the Shattering took place. Anyway,
Interesting.
both of these twins were born afflicted. Specifically, in the Japanese text, it's said that their births were vulnerable.
I don't know if we'll find out. We probably will, but do we know why they were born afflicted? Like for any reason? I just find it interesting that Marika gave birth to Morgott and Mohg, who were afflicted with Omen genes, and then she also has had these two who are afflicted with rot and eternal childhood. Like, I don't know, it makes me wonder what's happening in the higher powers of the cosmos to cause Marika's children to suffer these various issues, I guess. I'm intrigued. I would like to know more.
Miquella was born afflicted with eternal youth, and Malenia, for her part, was vulnerable to rot. Interestingly, Malenia's scarlet rot is actually an outer god. This outer god, like many others in the game, seems to have an order that
Interesting.
is able to be imposed upon the world via an Empyrean vessel.
Wow.
And Malenia was that vessel. And while the
Yeah.
scarlet rot is pretty terrible, you can sort of argue that it's got a beauty to it. According to Gowry, the order of rot is resplendent. It's a cycle of death and rebirth. Kind of like the lotus flower, which is a flower that blooms anew, beautiful and fresh from mud. I actually have art of this flower hanging in my home. I always love the symbol of it.
It's gorgeous.
I actually have lots of art hanging now, and I'm going to talk about all of this artwork that you can buy at the end of the video. Anyway,
Ooh, yes,
so
please.
Malenia the Empyrean was
Sell to me,
vulnerable
Vaati.
to and afflicted by the scarlet rot. There was said to be no cure to this, and while fire and consecration seemed to be somewhat effective at warding it off, Malenia would slowly lose her physical self to the rot.
Poor lady.
Interestingly, old legends of the Scarlet Rot have persisted in the world for generations, and we learn more about the Rot God from the Blue Dancer charm. The dancer in blue represents a fairy who, in legend, bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. Specifically, this god was long ago sealed away in the stagnant water that is downstream of the Ainsel River underground. And wherever rot appears, the kindred of rot appear as well. These are pests and servants of the rot, and now, in the current age, these are servants that have been forsaken by Malenia, who is their new goddess. So, this blind swordsman with the flowing curved sword actually went on to become Malenia's mentor. So, technically it's him that we have to blame for this goddamn attack.
I think, that's funny, I think I just have trouble, like, processing a lot of this because so much of Elden Ring, it seems, is, like, what am I trying to say? It's concepts, right? And it's, like, the sublime, indescribable entities that we can't necessarily envision and have no real embodiment. So rot is a god, but it's not because it's a thing, but it is because it's a thing that then afflicts people like Malenia and has all the kindreds of rot and has the servants of rot. And it's like, you're never going to meet rot, right? Because it's an intangible thing, but it's a god. Like that, I think that's what I struggle with. Like the greater will is not, it's not a person, which is why it uses Empyreans and Marika to manifest itself. But I think I'm just such a visual person. Like I want to see where it comes from and what it is, but you can't because it's just a concept. I find it really hard to follow.
The prosthesis wearer heirloom tells us more. A talisman engraved with a scene from a heroic tale. Though born into the accursed rot, when the young girl encountered her mentor and his flowing blade, she gained wings of unparalleled strength.
So cool, man.
Malenia's ridiculous attack is called the waterfowl dance, and aesthetically it makes sense that, flowing waters would counter the effects of rot. For just as still waters turn foul, stagnation turns to decay. Thus, warriors must remain ever drifting. And indeed, Malenia does resist really cool. The call of the rot. There's a lot of evidence that she's not really a willing vessel, but through sheer will and sense of self, she resists the rot. And only when she is truly pressed in battle will she abandon this will and bloom into the goddess within.
Oh.
Malenia's first bloom was during her fight against Radahn, and releasing her scarlet rot was a last-ditch effort that would forever taint the land of Caelid and cripple Radahn. So, whatever she was fighting for in this fight against Radahn, somehow
why were they
it
fighting?
was worth this terrible act. In general terms, at least, it's clear that Malenia was fighting for her brother. Apart from the times where she relapses into being the goddess of rot,
the Blade of Miquella.
She is known as the Blade of Miquella. She actually goes to great lengths to tell you
I know
this.
things.
I don't know if you heard. Despite being the toughest
I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella.
boss in From Software history, she's actually fighting for his right to godhood, not her own. In Malenia's own words, her brother Miquella possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god. He is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. For his part, Miquella did a lot to earn his sister's dedication, not the least of which was inspiring her armor and a prosthetic of unalloyed gold. It is not just his sister that loved Miquella, many people did. The bewitching branch is an item that you can use to turn enemies into temporary allies, and it reads, "Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." For his father Radahn, Miquella fashioned and gifted to him a fundamentalist incantation called Triple Rings of Light. Radahn then returns the favor, gifting back an incantation called Radahnn's Rings of Light.
That's
These
cute.
interactions show some of Miquella's positive connections with his father
That's really
and
cute.
also Golden Order fundamentalism. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. So, what is unalloyed
Interesting.
gold?
Okay.
Well, an alloy is a composition of metals, so unalloyed gold is pure gold, essentially,
I bet
with
that's
no
heavy.
external mixtures. This gold apparently can ward away the meddling of outer gods, and so Miquella bent a lot of his efforts towards creating an unalloyed gold needle. Specifically, this needle was crafted for his sister, to ward off the rot god and forestall the effects of the incurable rotting sickness.
Okay.
We see the bond between the siblings as well when we visit Miquella's haligtree. We see a statue of a one-armed woman embracing a child, Miquella. In this place, we see the biggest example of Miquella's benevolence, the haligtree, and the society that was built into the brace that supports it. This was a promised land, seen as a salvation to many who were shunned or persecuted, provided that they can actually find the path here, of course. And like many other Empyreans, Miquella seems to have had the will within them to create a new order, and his is an order that's somewhat modelled on the ones that came before it. The biggest thing is that the haligtree is clearly inspired by the Erdtree.
Yeah.
But the difference is that Miquella's haligtree is said to be accepting of all, even those the Erdtree shuns. Miquella himself was once embedded inside of the haligtree, and he watered it with his very own blood since it was a mere sapling. Tragically, however, he was ripped out of this womb during the shattering, and his haligtree ultimately failed to grow into an Erdtree, becoming a misshapen husk instead.
This is too much. Like, this is too much. So, oh my god, I feel emotional. Get a grip, Emma, get a grip. Wow, so Miquella fashioned this salvation for people who were cast aside by the Golden Order, essentially. So if only many of the Omens and people had known about this place, and they could have created a Isle of Misfits, as it were. That's really sad, dude.
But that's the story for another day. There's also a ton of cut content to do with Miquella, and he's one of the most mysterious demigods, who I'm sure we'll learn about more later. But there is one more thing that I want to mention before I go. It's kind of one theory I had during the making of this video. So Miquella and Malenia each have their own butterflies. Malenia's is the Aeonian butterfly, which inhabit the swamp of Aeonia and are rumoured to come from the wings of the rot goddess herself. And I think it's fair to say that Miquella's butterfly is the nascent butterfly, which appears as if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. This is a reference to Miquella's eternal youth and his cocoon in the haligtree. But there is, of course, a third butterfly, right? There's the smouldering butterfly.
Oh, yeah.
It's said to be an eternally burning butterfly that serves as kindling. Now, bear with me, but it's my theory that this butterfly is a reference to Melina, who the Blade of Calling calls the kindling maiden and the one who walks alongside flame.
I like that theory.
This might suggest that Melina is a sibling to Malenia and Miquella. Again, that's just a theory, but what I really want to talk about here is that, at the very least, Melina is almost certainly the daughter of Marika. We learned this a long time ago from looking at her name in the game's files, and we can further infer it from her dialogue, as she has a few lines that refer to mothers and one that says that she was born inside the Erdtree. So her being the daughter of Marika is also just a theory, but this one is much more concrete than the butterfly one. Although the reason I like the butterfly theory is that it gives us a hint as to who Melina's parents might have been. Her parents would have been Radahn and Marika, which is to say Marika herself alone, I guess, because Radahn is Marika. Honestly, Melina as a character has only become more mysterious since the game was released, and I'm really only scratching the surface with this theory. But speaking of times before Elden Ring was released, back then, a long time ago, I commissioned this piece from a renowned artist named Marco, and now I'm so excited to reveal it for the first time. This storybook scene is heavily inspired by the early looks we had.
Right, I'll leave a link to the video so you can go check out the merch and the ad at the end of this video, but I won't make you sit through it. That was very intense. It was awesome to learn more about how like all of the relations work and the motivations behind a lot of the demigods. I hadn't quite gleaned how close Malenia and Miquella are. I mean, I guess it makes sense with the Blade of Miquella thing. Like, she basically has dedicated a lot of herself to protecting Miquella, I would assume, because he's a baby and he can't protect himself. But that was so awesome. That was really, really cool. I'm going to watch one more just while we're here, because I think I might just watch all of Vaati's lore vids. So the next one on his playlist is the lore of Elden Ring's bosses, and I think that would be a nice one to watch. I was going to watch the Miquella one that was released like 3 weeks ago, but I just think it's going to be too long and this video is going to be too long. So we'll jump into this one and just do them chronologically, I guess, because that was awesome. And I just feel like I want to watch one more just to round things off. So let's see what's happening in the Lore of Elden Ring's bosses, featuring Death's Kindred.
Where do you go after death? What is the right way to die?
Oh,
Can death be overcome?
This is
And
deep,
if it
real
can,
quick.
What are the consequences of such a thing? These questions are at the very heart of Elden Ring's story, and in order to answer them, I want to go over a set of bosses that are defined by their relationship to death. Those being the Deathbirds, the Ancestral Spirits, the Tibia Mariners, the Godskins, the Burial Watchdogs, and the Black Knife Assassins.
This is going to be
Understanding these
cool.
bosses will teach you so much. In Elden Ring, one's self is separated into two distinct entities. There's the body, which is one's physical self or corporeal flesh, and then there's the spirit, which is essentially the soul that commonly persists after death.
Nice.
In the age of the Erdtree, the bodies of the dead and their spirits are returned to the Erdtree. This is done via a process called Erdtree burial, where great tree roots in catacomb dungeons absorb the dead so that they might be immortalized
So
with
crazy.
the Erdtree. But it was not always this way. In fact, the entire culture of death had a different shape in the earlier days of the Lands Between. Back then, instead of Erdtree burial, death commonly burned in ghost flame.
Oh.
Ghost flame, also known as spirit flame, is a cold, white flame that is created when bones are burned to ash. We learn this from the fallen hawks who
Ooh.
prowl the underground rivers.
Oh,
When the last
gross.
embers of their torches were used up, they were forced to burn the bones of their fellows instead, and acquired the cold ghost flame. This process appears to help separate the spirit from the body. And while a lot of these spirits appear to be vengeful based on
That's
the ghost
really cool.
flame spells, I think
That always reminds me of Marta Logarius. I couldn't remember his name. I'm ashamed of myself. Marta Logarius from Bloodborne is what these mofos remind me of. That's all I wanted to say. Carry
in
on.
general, having the body separated from the spirit in this way would have been a desired outcome. I speculate that we see proof of this even in the current age, where the wandering dead at Agheel Lake gaze at the sky, praying that the dragon Agheel might burn them to ash.
That is
Perhaps
so
this was
dark,
simply
isn't it?
the acceptable way to put a tired body to rest.
That is so dark.
The keepers of Ghost Flame were the Deathbirds, who tended to the flame in their
See, I wouldn't have seen a lot about Deathbirds because every time I saw one in the game, I just simply ran away on torrent and rested at the nearest site of grace that I could find. They're too
graveyards,
scary.
raking out the ashen remains of the dead from
You
their
don't like
kilns.
them.
So I like to think of the Deathbirds as serving the old process of death and delivering death by reducing bodies to ash so that spirits might be better able to move on.
That's
Now,
quite nice,
admittedly, a lot of
actually.
these spirits are vengeful, and that's how Ghost Flame is sort of weaponized by the Deathbirds and sorcerers. But I do think that at its core, Ghost Flame was important just because it separated the body and the spirit. After all, the explosive Ghost Flame sorcery compares this process of death to the Erdtree's process of death, which was pretty all-encompassing. So I think it's safe to assume that Ghost Flame was just really important to the process of death, and it was more than just, vengeful spirits and a weapon to be used.
That is
Next,
so
we should
cool.
talk about the Twin Bird, which was the mother of the Deathbirds.
Oh.
We don't find this creature in-game, but we can find its likeness painted vividly upon a kite shield that one of the Deathbirds drops. The design
Aw.
might remind you of a phoenix, which is traditionally drawn with bright colours and a crest of feathers and a longish neck. Of course, the phoenix is a creature that rises from the ash when it dies, which
Yeah.
is obviously extremely fitting for this story. So the kite shield tells us that the twin bird, or this phoenix creature, is said to be the mother of the Deathbirds. But not only that, it's also called the envoy of an outer god. So
Oh,
we can
of
kind of compare
course.
the twin bird
Here we
to
go.
the two fingers, then, who are also envoys to an outer god. They are envoys to the greater will, and similarly, I assume the twin bird probably communes with some outer god of death. And while we're definitely left wondering what greater purpose this outer god
Do you know what? Like, I have no I've not fleshed this out because it's just crossed my mind, but we have twin birds who like are just one thing, right? Even though they're called twin birds, they're just one thing. Then we have the two fingers who it's one hand with two fingers, and then there's a lot of siblings, right? So like Miquella and Malenia, but then Radahn and Marika, there's obviously that theory that they are one person. It makes me think like they are a couple, but are they part of one thing? Like, is that sort of alluding back to the idea of them being one? I don't know what I'm trying to say. I think I know what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that a lot of things in Elden Ring seem to come in twos, but they only represent one thing. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure.
Might have. The mere fact that it exists lends a lot of significance to the twin bird and its death birds as well. A variation on the death bird is the death right bird, which is an alternate boss, and it's a far more threatening foe,
Yeah,
as
I
it
hate
actually
this
seems
thing.
to use power that it's gained from certain spirits and ghost flame. And if you look really closely at its ethereal wings, you might even spy little spirits lurking within. And when I saw these, I was really excited because I recognized the weapon they're using, and the weapon explains who they are.
Oh.
They're holding a little death ritual spear, and that item reads, "The priests became the guardians of the birds through the rite of death, which is a part of their contract for a far-off resurrection." So deathbirds have a lot to do with sacrificial rites. You know, they don't just attend to the ghost flame, they also deliver death, and they also perform rites of death. So we can assume that these priests were sacrificed in a rite of death so that they could lend a sort of spiritual strength to the deathbirds.
So cool.
But we're still left wondering about the nature of their contract with the deathbirds, which promises a far-off resurrection for them. You know, what agreement did these priests come to with the deathbirds?
Yeah, why would you
What
allow
has to
yourself
happen for their
to
contract to be fulfilled?
live in
and
those wings?
How will they even be resurrected? In terms of
Kinda
where
gross.
the deathbirds appear, they kind of appear everywhere, and I think that might be a hint that their influence was once present far and wide. And while their importance in the current age is likely quite diminished, they still definitely are relevant in the Lands Between. In fact, many other enemies
Creepy
actually
things.
make reference to them, and some even successfully channel their powers. Even Ghostflame lights the way in catacomb dungeons to this day. But in general, there is a lot of power that can be gained from death in the Lands Between, which brings us to the Ancestral Spirit.
I am not ready for this because this boss fight depressed me so much because I just felt like I was murdering this regal beast who was just innocently hanging out in the woods. And also the music in this boss fight is incredibly, incredibly beautiful. So I just felt like a monster killing this thing. It didn't make me feel good about myself.
In the flourishing landscapes underneath the Lands Between, you would have found the bodies of 3 large stags enshrined by the ancestral followers.
Yep.
These warriors, hunters, and shamans believe heavily in the principle that life sprouts from birth, but also from death. I think this principle is sort of represented by horns, because in real life, horns continue to grow throughout the lifespans of animals, with their primary function usually being to convey a social hierarchy. And here, the largest and most influential creature is a giant stag. And in the world of Elden Ring, since life continues after death, it makes sense then that this creature's antlers continue to bud and grow even after its death. We learn this from defeating the regal ancestor spirit and looking at the horn of this fallen king. New growths bud, glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. Long-lived beasts like this are worshipped by the ancestral followers, a race of beings who keep their distance from the Erd Tree and are just content to await new buds and new growth.
I think, just quickly, if I was in Elden Ring and I had to be part of a clan, I would definitely live down here with these people wearing horns and hanging out with all of the bunny rabbits and deer. Yeah. Or I'd be one of the old hags in the Altus Plateau. Can't decide. Maybe I would be a hag.
If a being does not show signs of budding horns or new growth, then they are sacrificed with an axe called the Winged Greathorn.
Ooh.
Interestingly, the twin blades of this sacrificial axe are called Envoy's Wings, which might be a reference to the twin bird we mentioned earlier, which was also a winged envoy.
Interesting.
According to the Horn Charm talismans, the ancestral spirits specifically arise from long-lived beasts, and I think this touches on another commonly repeated theme in Elden Ring, which is that there are benefits to living life to its fullest potential. To quote some more Deathbird items, the most glorious end awaits those who cling tenaciously to life, and it is important to render up a death worth offering.
That's
Those
really
who lived a heroic life were
cool.
even able to go on and see a unique version of grace in the afterlife. We currently think that this grace is red, and that these are the same red rays of grace that you might have noticed when you first explored the Forbidden Lands.
Wow.
So this might be the most intriguing part of the video. Let me explain.
Okay,
Past
I'm
the
ready.
Forbidden
I'm ready.
Lands and deep within the consecrated snowfields is a Tibia Mariner, and this one drops Helfen's Steeple, a great sword that reveals just a mind-blowing amount of lore for one item.
Ooh.
First, it reads, Greatsword patterned after the black steeple of the Helfen, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. So the word steeple is commonly used to describe the tall spire found on churches, and indeed the design of Helfen's steeple echoes that of the Morian blade from Dark Souls, which also referenced the spire of a church. However, while I think Helfen is likely to be a sort of church, I don't think it's a building. Instead, this item seems to be describing the shape of a black tree in the spirit world, a so-called lampwood or lamplight tree that serves as a guidepost for the heroic dead. The item goes on to say that lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, and it is said that it can only be seen by heroic spirits or those who met their death in battle. So the black tree of Helfen is almost like this dark mirror of the Erd tree, but in the spirit world. It's so interesting that it even gives off its own guidance of grace, and there's a few reasons we speculate that this grace might be red. First, a red gem can be found at the very tip of Helfen's steeple, and a gem on the rolled medallion as well. Plus there's a red glow visible from the sword's gem, and a red glow from the rolled medallion when you hold it up at the Grand Lift, where it takes you to the Forbidden Lands, where we speculate that you can briefly glimpse this lamplight, or red grace, filtering between the trees. So you might be asking, why can we see the grace when we're not dead? But technically tarnished are defined as the dead who yet live, so it might make some sense that we can see it.
Oh, loophole.
The next question is,
Love it.
where does the lamplight lead? And I think there's two options. One is that the lamplight might lead back to Helfen itself. That is the source of the light after all, and Helfen's steeple can be enwreathed in ghost flames, so maybe the dead are sort of put to rest here. Alternatively though, I guess it's also possible that the lamplight has plans for the heroic dead, just like grace has plans for the tarnished. It might lead them somewhere else as well. We just don't know.
I feel like Helfen steeple looks like the insignia on the armor of the enemies around Volcano Manor. And I can't remember what they were called, but it's reminding me of that.
Who helped with these theories. She pointed out the similarities that Helfen has with Valhalla of Nordic folklore. If you don't know, Valhalla is a place where brave spirits would be invited to dine with the gods. And it seems that Helfen is inspired by that same sort of folklore, since only heroic spirits can
There's
see
a lot
the
of
light.
Viking
Not to mention Hel,
nods
with one
in
L,
Elden Ring.
is actually the name of the world of the dead in Nordic folklore. And speaking of folklore, this finally brings us back to the Tibia Mariner, the boss that dropped Helfen's steeple in the first place. The Tibia Mariners themselves actually have no written lore to speak of, which is kind of a shame. But what they do have is an incredible visual design, and it kind of carries them from a lore perspective, because this visual design is steeped very heavily in appropriate folklore.
The Tibia Mariner remind me of oh my god, what's it called? Guys, what's it called? There's a is it Greek mythology where there's something that takes you in a little boat from like life till death, like to the afterlife? What am I thinking of? Hang on, let me Google it. The ferryman. I'm thinking of the ferryman, right? The ferryman. Ah, this is it. It's Greek. The ferryman of Hades. Oh, thank God, I couldn't remember what I was thinking. It's Hades. These two rivers divided the souls of the living and the departed. Those joining the underworld needed to cross by boat. The ferryman of Hades was Charon. In Greek paintings and poetry, you'll find depictions of Charon taking the dead through the river into the underworld. I'll put a picture on the screen, but that's what he is. It's just come to me as though in a vision. It's Charon, the ferryman. Oh my gosh. I really hope that he delves into this, because if not, then I need to make my own video. I really hope that he does. Come on, Vaati, don't let me down.
So, in Greek mythology, there is a stretch of water called the River Styx, which marks the boundary between Earth and the underworld. And to help souls of the deceased cross this river, you have to find the river boatman and pay him to safely
It's the
take you across.
ferryman!
Just so, I kind of imagine the dead in Elden Ring are being drawn to the Tibia Marina.
He could have got into that a lot more than he did, because there's a hell of a lot to unpick in the mythology of the ferryman and the afterlife. But that really excites me. So maybe we need to talk about that more another day.
You know, he has a purple lantern and a loud horn, and he might offer a similar sort of guidance to the underworld. There is one spell that references this boss briefly. It's Tibia's Summons, and it says, "For time immemorial, the dead have been those who are lost and require guidance and leadership." Suffice to say, death was a very important facet of life in the Lands Between, even for the gods at one point. Which brings us to the Godskins, an order of apostles that were born to deliver destined deaths to the gods long ago. I kind of like to think of them as a counterbalancing force to the influence of gods, wielding sharp tools for boring and slicing through flesh, and incanting spells that mocked the wrath of the gods. It seems these Godskins actually succeeded in hunting many gods, if their name is to be believed. Their robes were made by sewing together patches of smooth skin, and the nobles' robes include subcutaneous fat, which makes them plump and soft. Known for their seven-faced aprons,
they're cuddly.
These nobles are the most ancient apostles, and they're deeply inhuman.
Squishy.
Their weapon is not a slicer, but a stitcher, and they wield it with a skill that is unmatched by any lowborn. These beings were elevated to a social class above the lowborn because they served a queen, a gloam-eyed queen. The black flames they wield are actually channeled from that queen's greatsword, and it was this queen who raised them from birth in the first place.
Do we know who she is?
Newborn apostles in godskin cloth, so that they might grow to become the death of the gods. This gloam-eyed queen was powerful, but what makes her character so important is that she was also an Empyrean, chosen by the Fingers. Now, remember, an Empyrean is a candidate chosen by the Two Fingers to become a god. So, despite being such a dark character, the gloam-eyed queen was still a valid choice for godhood.
Interesting.
And all of this, of course, was before the Rune of Death had been removed from the Elden Ring, and it was from this Rune of Death that the Black Flame originally got its power. We only know of one other Empyrean alive at this time, and that would have been Queen Marika. Naturally, at some point, Marika and the gloam-eyed queen clashed. Though, according to the Godslayer Greatsword description, we know that the gloam-eyed queen was defeated by Malekith, who was the shadow of Queen Marika. He is credited with defeating the gloam-eyed queen and the apostles, and sealing off the Rune of Death, which again was the source of their power. What's not clear to me about all of this, though, is whether Marika and the gloam-eyed queen were rival Empyreans competing for godhood, or if Marika was already a god and decided to take out the gloam-eyed queen because the gloam-eyed queen was an Empyrean threat to her age.
That seems more likely.
At any rate, it seems like Marika and the gloam-eyed queen are opposites. You know, the gloam-eyed queen ends ages, but Marika wished for an age eternal. So it makes sense that they'd clash, but there's still so much we don't know about them. But after all of this, Marika's Age of the Erd Tree began, and during this age, you were supposed to wait for the roots of the Erd Tree to call to you, so that your spirit could return to the Erd Tree after death to be immortalized with it. Specifically, these roots were found in catacomb dungeons, and there's even a statue found across the lands between that was designed to help people find these catacomb dungeons. This is the statue of Rosus, the Usher of Death, and he shows the dead the path towards catacomb dungeons.
That is surprisingly helpful.
The catacombs themselves were built in the age of the Erd Tree. This is proven by root resin, which states that the roots here were once linked to the Erd Tree, and it was for this reason that catacombs were constructed around these great tree roots. So at this point in history, Queen Marika had implemented her new concept for death in the lands between, and in her eyes, a proper death meant returning to the Erd Tree. Thus, in the days where catacomb roots were connected to the Erd Tree, these catacombs were valid sites of Erd Tree burial, and I think we literally see this taking place, as corpses can be seen being absorbed by the roots at the end of every catacomb dungeon.
The
process of Erd Tree burial, though, is described as an honor reserved for heroes, and this process of Erd Tree burial is presided over by Erd Tree burial watchdogs, who protect the
are actually
catacombs
cats.
with their impish servants.
Why do they look like cats?
These creatures are golems, and I think that they might have been created
They're the worst enemies
specifically
in the game.
during the period of history where
100%.
Liurnia had an allegiance with Leyndell, since they served the process of Erd Tree burial, but their weapons actually have glintstone embedded in them. Furthermore, when hit by impure crystal darts, they malfunction, which I think is further proof of their glintstone.
Oh, I didn't know that.
origins.
That's awesome.
In some catacombs and graveyards, the physical bodies of the dead have begun to rise. These beings are defined as those who live in death, and they are a relatively recent phenomenon in the lands between. Instead of having their body and spirit return to the Erd Tree, they rise, in an act that is completely at odds with Marika's concept of death, Erd Tree burial, and the Golden Order. I'll go into more detail on this later when we talk about Godwyn, but basically, this all began when Rani stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, and then she imparted its power onto the knives of the Black Knife Assassins. You can tell the assassins have quite a lot of secrets in their lore. We do know a few things, though. We know that they're all women, they're all Newman, and they have links to Queen Marika and the Eternal City as well. We'll have to go into more detail on them later, though. But with their knives imbued with the Rune of Death, they carved a curse mark into two demigods, Rani and Godwyn. The curse mark itself is an obtainable item, and it reads, "This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, two demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into two half-wheels. Rani was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone."
That's
so
mileage
interestingly,
here, guys.
these assassins and the knives imbued with the Rune of Death had the power to cleave life from the physical body and from the spirit as well.
That's mileage.
Specifically, Rani was the one whose flesh perished, and she became a disembodied spirit, free from her corporeal flesh, which is what she wanted, and she now occupies a doll. But Godwyn became the Prince of Death, living without a soul and spreading the Rune of Death across the lands between through Deathroot. Now, according to item descriptions, Deathroot is the Rune of Death itself, and it acts as a source that gives rise to those who live in death. Now, what I find really interesting is the fact that this Rune of Death that is embodied by Deathroot and those who live in death, it clearly has aspects of both death and life as well, which makes sense based on what you should have learned from this episode, right? Because death isn't just the end, it's life as well. So it makes sense that those who live in death would have aspects of death and life, all contained in these beings that were brought to life, in a sense, by the Rune of Death.
This is a lot.
And while those who live in death are a bit unnatural, because they do come from this fragmented Rune of Death, this half of a curse mark, they still have life in death. And so you can argue that they still have a right to life. And in fact, that's entirely what one of the endings is about, at least how I understand it, and I'll try to explore it more thoroughly later on. These beings are persecuted and hunted down by fundamentalists of the Golden Order, and whether these fundamentalists are truly serving the fundamentals of order in the first place is just a topic that is very interesting to explore. So, in conclusion, maybe it shouldn't be a sin to live in death. After all, to quote Fia, "In death there is only peace, for in death there can be no sensation." Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Quelaag for looking over this script.
Yeah, we
She
love
has an awesome
Quelaag.
channel that you really should go and check out, and it's been great to have someone to just discuss my ideas with. Many of Elden Ring's bosses.
Wow. Okay, sorry, I didn't talk much in the last 10 minutes. I think I was just a bit blown away by everything we'd learned. First of all, thank you again, Vaati, for these incredible videos and for teaching us about Elden Ring's lore and just sharing your ideas with us. I think I saw a comment on the last video where someone was saying that he was wrong about a few things in the last video that we watched, and that's fine. Like, there's no guidebook telling us what the facts are in Elden Ring. This is all theories. Vaati is a fan. He's an incredibly intelligent researcher, and I really appreciate all of his theories and his interpretations of all of the lore text that I'm quite frankly too lazy to read by myself. So, you know, and like at the start of the other video, he corrected himself. So, you know, it's a work in progress. We're all just big fans of the game trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So this was a lot to digest. I feel like last time I watched a deep lore video and then kind of like a listicle, and it was a bit less heavy, but that was really heavy. So let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to chat. I think the role of life and death in Elden Ring is fascinating, as Vaati quite rightly said, and I'm fixated on the twin thing. That so many things in Elden Ring are twins that lead to one central point. Makes me wonder if there's going to be like another Erdtree or something revealed later on. That would be intense. I'm also really excited to see Greek mythology come into play with the ferryman. I've noticed a hell of a lot of Viking mythology and Viking history in Elden Ring. I noticed something else earlier. There was Rollo. The character of Rollo appeared, and that's Ragnar's brother in Viking history. So that's just interesting. It's really cool to see all of the inspirations for Elden Ring pulling from history and mythology and things I'm really interested in. It's one of my favorite things. I wish I knew more about it, but everything I know about mythology virtually is learnt from TV and video games. Like Returnal pulls a lot on Greek mythology with Atropos and Helios and you know, the curse of forever rolling the ball up and down the hill, Sisyphus. It fascinates me and I love it. So Elden Ring, you're the best. I loved this one, I really did. I'm heartbroken about the omens. I am encouraged by Malenia and Miquella's relationship, and I think Marika might just be a bad seed, especially with killing that other Empyrean god lady, god queen. I think Marika might be a problem. Like, I think the Golden Order is actually probably a bad thing, and that the Lands Between would be better off if it all moved to sort of the haligtree vibes. So that's my opinion. Take it or leave it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I will see you very soon for some other stuff, I'm sure. Bye.